right, welcome in to Appeal to Heaven. I am your host, Jonah Schultz. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I have a very special episode today. I think one that's very important to cover. Make sure before we get started that you're liking videos, subscribing, make sure you're sharing, get this everywhere that you can, share it with your friends, your family, all your loved ones, everyone you think needs to hear it. But this episode today, I wanted to kind of get off the track of just focusing in on the story of today. Obviously, we have everything going on with Iran, gas prices going up, gas prices going down, the uncertainty surrounding it, right? Saying the war is near an end, or maybe it's going on for a long period of time. There's so much we don't know. And today I wanted to kind of cut through all of that and I think get to the root of what has been plaguing our country and our people now for a very long time. My last two episodes you've been following have been very Trump critical. Now, if you know me as an individual, you know me as a right-wing individual who is very conservative at heart, very nationalist at heart, very much just wants to put America first, wants to put Christ first. That's my goal in everything that I do. And these last two episodes have been very focused in on where I think Trump is falling short in that regard. And as a result, on social media, I've gotten a lot of a plethora of hateful comments, hateful messages from individuals. And I'm not saying this to say woe is me or anything like that. This is something I dealt with for a long time being in politics, but it was very striking to me, the response. And I wanted to share some of them because I think it illustrates for us what is really going on here in this country. And I'm not going to name any names or anything like that, but I want to read through a few of these responses to my post talking about how I feel like Trump has not followed through on his immigration policy, how I feel like the adventurism is bad for America, right? These are basic views held by millions of Americans on the right wing. And these are some of the responses that I got. Trump hasn't been wrong yet, but that doesn't matter to weak malcontents always bitching about something to sound knowledgeable. Here's another one. More demo commie bullshits, aka propaganda. You just lost my support. Not that you had it. Was open. I'm ashamed that I used to promote you as the next Charlie Kirk. This has to be AI. I thought Schultz was a Christian. If that's so, then this post is either totally bogus or Schultz is not a Christian. You are really out of your mind. Jonah is a rhino, one who thinks he is much smarter than Trump, totally ignoring all of the sacrifices that Trump made for his love of America, totally ignoring all that Trump has accomplished in his time as president. Jonah is an unappreciative little wit. I call BS. Well, I guess everyone has their price, and Schultz has found his. So who bought you out? These are just a handful of comments that I thought were a little bit comical, a little bit interesting, and I share them because I think they're so indicative of the moment we're in. Many of these people making these comments, I'm not sharing all of them. That was a very condensed chunk. Many of these are the same people who saw me run an 18-month campaign, supported me throughout an 18-month congressional campaign, openly defending and promoting Donald Trump in 2022. These are people who literally stood with me on street corners protesting vaccine mandates, saw me go into bat for employees who had been fired or who were at risk of losing their jobs for making their own, personal health choices. And these are people that some of which I considered friends, people who I had developed a relationship with through politics because we were fighting the same battle. But what was so interesting is the moment that I step out of line when it comes to Trump, not attacking him from the left, not adopting left-wing kind of John Kasich, Mike DeWine, any of these formerly Republican Liz Cheney type of attacks from the left where you say Trump's too harsh, he's horrible to immigrants, Trump is a Nazi, any of that crazy left-wing stuff that you see a lot of former right-wingers who want some kind of credibility with the left. Nothing like that, but just citing his own words and actions, to make a case that he's not acting in the interest of America first. When I did that, it is like a beast was unleashed inside of these people, that they turned almost into these rabid attack dogs. And I'm not even saying this to dunk on these people specifically, because I think many of them are good people and people who truly want to do good. But there is this anger and this visceral reaction when you criticize the man, Donald Trump, when you criticize the man and his policies, Donald Trump, coming from those who share many or most of the same beliefs, or maybe all of the same beliefs, policy and otherwise, that I do. And something I've been noticing a lot recently is this urge. And it's been happening for a long time, but it's really come to a peak recently, is this urge to jump into an all in attack mode. The moment somebody says something that is against our worldview. Like, I used to love so and so, but now I can't stand them ever since I heard them say this, right? You see this a lot with Tucker Carlson, right? Many, many millions of people, at least thousands, tens of thousands of people who once loved Tucker Carlson, now, because he's not pro Israel, hate the man. And I mean, hate the man. That's a perfect example. Is I love 99% of what he says, but he attacked Israel and they're our greatest ally, right? You see it with, it could be any kind of figure, right? Nick Fuentes is somebody who's made a rise on the right wing and kind of in the news bubble. A lot of people love him, a lot of people hate him. But what I've seen from a lot of people is they loved him all of a sudden. Then he said one thing that they disagreed with, and they're like, I don't trust this guy anymore. Usually, when we see a lot of these right wingers jumping off the bandwagon of somebody, it's due to some criticism of Trump or Israel. But what we're seeing is this: if you don't totally uphold, if you don't totally affirm my worldview, then I want nothing to do with you and you are a bad person. That's what's ultimately happening. And this is a epidemic on the left and the right. I think the greatest threat, possibly the greatest threat in our time of this age, is this spiritual devotion that has taken hold when it comes to our politics. The only solution to ending the stranglehold that these politicians, that these insiders, that these mega donors, everybody in this inner circle of politics has over our lives, is to end this spiritual devotion that we have to men and recentering it on Christ. This phenomenon, it really noticeably began in 2008 with Barack Obama. Now, you can go through all of American history, certainly all of human history, and people get riled up when it comes to elections, when it comes to politicians, right? You can go back from the beginning of our nation, and you'll see some pretty wild things in newspapers, political advertisements, political paraphernalia, right? You can go all the way back between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, where there was a piece written. I don't know, I can't remember if it came directly from the Jefferson campaign, but I think it did, calling John Adams a transvestite. So you can take this stuff pretty far back as far as the contentiousness, but nothing has matched in all of American history what we began to see in 2008 with Barack Obama. And that was this turning of a political figure into a messianic figure, into a pop culture superstar, right? That's exactly what we saw with Barack Obama, right? Before he became president, during his presidency, where all of a sudden we went from having a president to all of a sudden Barack Obama, he's on ESPN, right? Barack Obama, he's at this basketball game, he's at this award. So turning them into somebody like a Jay-Z or something like that, a pop culture figure. Obviously, Barack Obama and Jay-Z both being very undeserving of being those figures, both very little talent ability or intellectual ability, certainly. But this did not truly take hold of the right until Donald Trump came along. Because you look at, I mean, really, you look at the figures that we had on the right wing when it comes to the highest levels of policy. You had George Bush, you had John McCain, you had Mitt Romney, right? Nobody's lining up behind John McCain and Mitt Romney ready to go to battle, right? Those are two of the most uninspiring humans that you will ever come across. But now, you used to see where during the Obama era, you saw the murals, right? You saw the murals of Barack Obama, whether it was in the inner city or I remember on a drive deep in the country on the side of a barn, right in the middle of farm country of Barack Obama, right? He kind of had his kind of communist art form, right? That kind of Soviet era looking art that everything that was drawn about Barack Obama somehow resembled. But you'd see his images, logos painted everywhere. And especially in the black community, you would see people wearing these T-shirts, almost uh, making it looking like Barack Obama, making him look like some sort of saint or religious icon. And through some of my previous work, I would be in the homes of many of these Black Americans and in these Black areas, and many of them would have pictures of Barack Obama hung above their mantle, hung above their dining room table. Right, there was a true reverence and spiritual devotion to this man that went beyond anything political. Right? I'm sure if you asked most of these people, what did he accomplish that benefited you? There would be very little that they could share with you. Certainly very little of substance. But nevertheless, there was this spiritual devotion. Now you see the Trump flags, right? Flying from homes. You see life-size cutouts of Trump put in people's windows, put in their yard. You see their houses painted. You see their fences painted. You see people with their stickers full of cars, or their car full of stickers. And this is not just any more political imagery during election season. This is not just political imagery where, we're heading to November of election season and you see yard signs, you see funny bumper stickers, you see flags, things of that nature that are very natural and very common throughout all of American history. But this is now universal, year round with intensity. And I wonder, and I think it's fairly obvious, could you imagine how our founding fathers would perceive this? If they were dropped right now and they walked around, whether it was Barack Obama or how a lot of people treated Kamala Harris, or whether it's Donald Trump, and you walked around and saw this type of devotion, this feverish devotion that people had, they would be, I believe, very deeply distraught and concerned over the health of our republic. They would believe that we had a king, or at the very least, wanted a king by the way that we behave. That we had, if we were not conquered already, if we did not already have a tyrant already, that we were seeking one, actively seeking one. The founding belief of the United States of America is that we could not idolize men, especially not political figures. That this was a recipe for absolute destruction of our families, of our country, of our souls, to worship men. And this was not just some prescription from our founding fathers or from the historical leaders of America. This is a true biblical mandate. You look at Psalm 146. Do not put your trust in princes, in human beings who cannot save. When their spirit departs, they return to the ground. On that very day, their plans come to nothing. Blessed are those whose help is in the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord their God. He is the maker of heaven and earth, the sea and everything in them. He remains faithful forever. When you read that, that is the foundation of America. That scripture right there is the foundation that our hope and our rights do not come from any man. We are called not to put our hope and our faith in any man, but rather our only hope is found in God, in a divine authority that presides over everything. And when you look at this reaction to me, when you look at this reaction to people like Tucker Carlson or any political figure, when people get these visceral reactions, why are they getting those reactions? The reason is they have put their faith, their spiritual faith, in a man, in a political figure, even myself. And we've all been guilty of it at one time or another. And so when you put that type of spiritual faith and devotion into a political figure, it is only a matter of time until that faith is broken, until they say something you disagree with, or until they do something that embarrasses your faith, that doesn't live up to your view of them. And that is the great danger, and why Satan is always pushing us to put our faith into these men, because not only will that cause us to follow them blindly, but it will cause us to be heartbroken and despair when ultimately, as it will every single time, if we have this faith and this devotion to humans, they come short, they fall short. You cannot truly live free as a nation or as an individual and put your faith, your spiritual faith, into a man, especially not one in the political realm. There's this great quote by George Washington that really spoke to me, and I read it earlier in the week. And he says, while zealously performing the duties of good citizens and soldiers, we certainly ought not to be inattentive to the higher duties of religion, to the distinguished character of patriot. It should be our highest glory to add the more distinguished character of Christian. Our founding fathers would look upon, I said this in a recent episode, would look upon us with shame from how far we've come. And I'm not saying would look upon you with shame, would look upon us, myself included, because of how far we have fallen from their design for us, their desire for us. And they were all imperfect, flawed men. We look at people in history and we have a tendency to either turn them into villains or heroes, perfect or perfectly imperfect. But they were all like us in the sense that they had struggles, they had confusion, they had questions, they certainly had faults, like all of us. But what made these men special was that despite all of that, they sought to put their hope, their aspirations, their country in the hands of somebody much greater than them, and that is God, specifically in Jesus. And that is something that we have forsaken, not just in the Trump era or the Obama era, but for quite some time now. A big reason why the left is winning on almost every single front is they have a spiritual energy. Their spiritual energy is focused. They don't know it. They have no idea, because the left is broadly not religious, but they are deeply spiritual. So when you look at the left, how are they spiritual? Well, they're spiritual in the sense that they are so deeply devoted to their cause. Their energy is spiritually focused because their movement is powered by this demonic influence. You probably had the question yourself, and I've had this question. Why does it seem like the left swims in unison? It's like those fish or those birds that one of them moves and they all move in perfect unison. from issue to issue, right? They push this area and this area. When there's this protest, they're out. They're always in sync, lockstep, in unison. It's almost impressive. It's almost impressive. And it is a little bit discouraging when you've been on the right wing to say, like, why, we're so divided. We're always fighting with each other. And the left is just, they're just taking ground. They're in unison. But when you look at humanity, if you've ever been in a workplace or you've run a project or you've had a family, you understand it makes no sense how you could get that many people to behave, to work in unison at every level, right? We see it from the people on the ground, the left wing movement on the ground, up through corporations, government, NGOs. Everything moves together in unison. And if you're like me, you've asked, how is that possible? And finally, I've come to the understanding that it is through a demonic influence that they are pushed all in the same direction. And since they are so devoted spiritually to their cause, they move in unison, without ceasing, without stopping, without resting. Let me give you some perfect examples of this, because the right wing is captured spiritually as well, but instead of fighting on the battlefield of what is good and what is true, we're simply following the commands of earthly rulers who are steering us in one direction or another, and mostly steering us away from the fight. So it's not always that we're being steered in the wrong direction in terms of we're being steered to do something negative, actively negative, but so often we're being steered away from the battlefield. Where if we are facing this demonic influence like we are from the left, righteous rulers would steer us in direction to confront that. But instead, we're constantly steered to either aid that group or to get out of their way. That's what the right wing has been for a long time. And if you don't understand or at least recognize the spiritual nature of the moment we now find ourselves in, we're destined to lose. There is no fighting against this force if you don't at first recognize it and recognize that it is very, very real and very deeply spiritual in nature. Spiritual devotion to anything else except Jesus Christ is a devotion to our own destruction. Now, let me give you some of those examples. The left wing, and there's a million different things that I can pick on with this. I could pick on transgenderism, you can pick on abortion, right? You can say this sacrament of abortion where there is a quite literal spiritual practice of abortion, right? A worship of the practice. It is child sacrifice that we've come to read about and know about throughout history, and the horrors of that brought to life in our modern age. We can talk about transgenderism, where there's a spiritual devotion to the demonic influence that causes children and adults to want to harm and mutilate their own bodies, right? Those are two very high profile, perfect examples. But just in the past week, a couple things that have been highlighted that show this devotion that you can see in every single aspect of left wing and liberal ideology is there was this video going around that you may have seen on the streets of New York where there was a liberal white man. And he was on the streets of New York with a megaphone at this pro-immigration, anti-ICE, pro-globalism, pro-multiculturalism, left-wing ideology rally. And he's in a megaphone. And he's saying, we want everyone to stay here, saying we don't want anybody taken from New York. We're all New Yorkers. We don't want any outsiders coming in and taking away our people, whether you're illegal, legal, blah, 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 whether regardless of where you're from, what language you speak. And in that moment, a Muslim man comes up from behind him, literally uses white man's shoulder as a launching pad, jumps up and throws a bomb into the crowd while shouting Allahu Akbar. Then the liberal white man continues to go on to defend immigration multiculturalism, you name it. And so what you see in that image is not only is it a perfect illustration of the self-destruction and the suicide of the West, but it is showing that quite literally this liberal white man, he can have a Muslim individual who shouldn't be here, right? Their parents came over here, we shouldn't have had him over here in the first place. Shout Allahu Akbar and try to murder people in the crowd, including him, and he will still go on to put his life and your life and my life down, lay that all down for that person who tried to kill him. That is nothing else but a spiritual devotion. That's not logical, that's not rational, that is spiritual. Let me give you another example. I'm going to throw some pictures up here. There are these two pictures that went viral on X, and it was from in Johannesburg in South Africa, and it was a a street view of two pictures of the exact same street. Right, this is kind of taken from Google Maps here, as you can see right on the street corner, and this is 2010 versus 2015. So these two pictures are taken, or excuse me, that is 2010 versus 2025. These two pictures are taken 15 years apart. 15 years apart. So in the one picture, you see green, right? You see grass, trees. Looks like a reasonably nice neighborhood. Now I can't see behind the trees what the houses may have looked like, right? Maybe it probably wasn't the wealthiest area to begin with. But then you fast forward 15 years, and it is indistinguishable from a sub-Saharan African, you know, bungalow town, right? This is straight out of the Stone Age. This happened in 15 years, and there is picture after picture. You can go to throughout South Africa, especially, but you can go to Google Maps throughout Europe. It's happening in the United States, right? You can look at some of the 1960s pictures of was Detroit or Cleveland or some of these cities, 1960s, 70s, 80s pictures, and you fast forward to today, and they're all just burnt out, empty buildings. So liberals will see this. I mean, we can all look out our window and we live in the real world. We can see this happening in real time, the destruction of our communities, right? And this isn't just getting poorer, this is outright destruction. This is a destructive force brought on by immigration, mass immigration, and diversity. That's what this is. So leftists, liberals, they'll see this all going on all around them, and they will still fight to the death for diversity. They will see their neighbors raped, right? They will see their communities destroyed. They will even have bombs thrown over their heads at rallies, and they will still fight for this to the death. This is a spiritual devotion. This is not rational. This is not logical. You can't argue this with facts and logic. You can't go to these people and say, look at all these statistics. They're living it just like you and I are. They are seeing it with their own eyes, but they are refusing to believe because their religion tells them that this must be so, that they must fight for this. And I've said it a million times. There's people, you might be one of them, who says, I'm not religious, I'm not spiritual, I just look at the world and see what's there. Everybody in this world worships something. Everybody in this world is spiritual. We are spiritual beings. So we're worshiping one thing or another. The only choice is what that is. Do we choose to worship what is good, what is true, what is beautiful? Or do we worship what is evil, what is wrong, what is destructive, what is chaotic, what is confusing? But it's not just happening on the left anymore. You look at some of our figures on the right, the so-called right, like Lindsey Graham. And what I find so frustrating about a lot of these conversations is so many of the people, like I mentioned in the beginning of the show, who have criticized me, they have been individuals who have just excoriated, absolutely ripped apart people like Lindsey Graham, and Lindsey Graham specifically, for being a war hawk, for being a neocon, for being America last. But now they will defend everything he says because he's in the good graces of Donald Trump. But Lindsey Graham went on Fox News to say, he's been going on Fox News for a while saying some crazy things. But what he said is, speaking directly to what he said to the isolationists, I'm not with you. I'm with Israel until my dying day. Isn't that an insane thing for a United States senator to say, that speaking directly to Americans, I'm not with you, I'm with this foreign country. I'm not with you, I'm with Israel. I'm not with you, I'm with the Israeli people. I'm with the IDF. I'm with Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm not with you. That's sick. That's a truly sick thing to say. And you have this sickness that has enveloped so much of our Christian community here in the United States, where you have this pastor, John Hughes, even just this past weekend, declaring that Jews are God's chosen people who stand above all others on this earth, talking to his Christian congregation. First of all, there are no people who stand above any other on this earth. There's Jesus Christ and there's everybody else. The only thing that separates people is if we choose to follow Christ. Because at the end of the day, he's chosen all of us. He's reached out to all of us. He is extending the invitation to each and every one of us to join him. We're the ones who have to make the choice. The chosen people are those who choose to follow Christ. It's really that simple. It's beautifully simple. And yet we have Christian pastors saying that we are beneath a group of people who has openly rejected Christ. What does that say? And so you cannot properly evaluate the battles of our day without understanding that you're at war with a spiritual devotion that will not bend, that will not break, regardless of arguments of facts or logic that you put in front of it. So you have to decide to spiritually equip yourself in order to fight that, in order to combat that. No nation is going to survive that devotes itself to men and devotes itself even worse to the demonic forces that we now see at play over Jesus Christ. If you want to see an America that you recognize, that you believe in, that once again has hope for peace, for prosperity, for virtue, this is what must change. This is the battle. We talk all the time. If you're in the right wing, you've heard it constantly about spiritual battle. This is it. Those who choose to follow Christ and those who choose to follow men, put their faith in men, and ultimately worship the demonic. Those are the only two choices, is ultimately what I'm trying to communicate to you. There's no middle ground. You can't say, well, I'm not gonna go this way or this way. There's no middle ground. There's no middle road. You have to choose. So regardless of where you are as a believer, as a non-believer, as a Christian, as an atheist, maybe you're of another faith entirely, my encouragement to you would be to take some time in prayer very soon and to seek Jesus and to invite him to come into your life, because he's already invited you, to accept his invitation and say, I'm here. I'm here. I want to do good in this world. I want to make a real difference. I want to see the beauty of this nation restored. I want to see the goodness of this nation restored. I want to see the goodness of my people restored, of my neighbors. Sometimes it starts with us. Maybe it's saying to God, I want to see the goodness, the kindness, the beauty in me. restored. That's step one. If you do that and we do that as a people, we're going to win. And that's the beautiful part. Is we know the path. This is exactly what our founding fathers did in 1776. They committed themselves to a divine cause. And yes, it was under the banner of the United States of America, but it was also under the banner of Jesus Christ, of appeal to heaven. It was under the understanding that they could do nothing, that they were nothing without him. So recommit yourself to that today, and I'm going to attempt to do the very same thing. All right, thanks for joining me today on Appeal to Heaven. Make sure you are liking, subscribing, and I will see you next time.